I died on my son's birthday. Tim was busy in the countryside, volunteering with his first love. My son called to tell him I was dying. He didn't believe it and hung up coldly. Later, when he saw my urn in my son's hands, he lost it completely. The beeping of machines beside my bed faded, and I closed my eyes for good. My son Frank cried his heart out, while doctors scrambled for a last attempt to save me. I was dead. An hour before, Frank called Tim, and said I was dying and wanted to see him one last time. Tim sarcastically asked, "What trick is your mom trying to pull now?" I had breast cancer, discovered when it was already too late. Many times I wanted to tell Tim, but he always cut me off impatiently. Today was Frank's birthday. I hoped Tim would come home so we could celebrate together, as a family, since I didn't have much time left. Even this small request, he refused. Frank clutched my lifeless body, refusing to let go. I wanted to comfort him, but my soul seemed to float uncontrollably away from him. I floated over to Tim. At the airport, he was sweating slightly, breathing heavily. When he saw Shirley, he quickly apologized for being late. Shirley was his first love, the kind that stayed in his heart. "It's okay. It's my first time volunteering in the countryside. I'm glad you're with me." Shirley smiled gently, her white dress accentuating her graceful figure. Seeing her, Tim's eyes were soft and filled with affection. He naturally took her luggage with a smile. How ironic that I died in the hospital, while he was busy volunteering with his first love. He never showed me that kind of tenderness. Tim and Shirley had known each other since they were kids. If Shirley hadn't gone abroad back then, I wouldn't even be in the picture. The airplane's air conditioning was very cold. Shirley huddled her arms together, shivering. Tim immediately took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. I laughed bitterly. This jacket was one I had specially tailored for him. They were heading to a remote mountain village to volunteer. It was growing dark by the time they got off the plane. They found a small restaurant to sit in. Shirley, from a noble family, looked disgusted. Although Tim also came from a prominent family, he didn't carry any arrogance. One reason I fell for him. Facing Shirley, he still took a napkin and wiped her chair several times. He gently pulled the chair out for her and even used hot water to sterilize her utensils. I used to think Tim didn't know how to be gentle. Turns out, his gentleness was reserved only for Shirley. At that moment, I wanted to leave. I didn't want to stay and be tormented by their emotional scenes. But no matter how hard I tried, my soul seemed tethered, following them, struggling fruitlessly many times before giving up. At the hotel, Tim and Shirley's rooms were next to each other. Tim rubbed his temples and collapsed tiredly onto the bed, taking out his phone and finally turning it on. Countless missed calls. They were from Frank using my phone. He frowned, showing a slight impatience. Just as he was about to call back, there was a knock on the door. Shirley, with red-rimmed eyes, asked in a pleading voice, "Tim, can I sleep with you tonight? I'm afraid of the thunder." I thought to myself, it was indeed raining outside, but the thunder's rumble wouldn't even match Tim's snores, for sure. Tim's response surprised me. "This isn't appropriate," he said. "Tim, I'm really scared and don't dare to sleep alone," she said, almost tearing up. "How did you sleep during thunderstorms all these years, then?" I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Sure enough, Tim, touched, nodded slightly. I wanted to float away immediately, unable to bear watching what might follow. Tim had booked a room with a king-sized bed. He asked the staff for an extra blanket and pillow. "You sleep on the bed. I'll sleep on the floor," he said, laying out the bedding for himself. Was he nervous seeing his first love? When he was with me, he certainly wasn't. Shirley bit her lip, giving Tim a pitiful look. "Tim, don't you want me?" she said, starting to unbutton her shirt, revealing her lace lingerie. Her fair skin glistened enticingly under the light. She leaned closer to Tim, almost pressing against him. Tim abruptly sat up, pushing her away with both hands. "Shirley, this isn't right," he said, a hint of irritation in his voice. Tears welled up in Shirley's eyes, and she bit her lip, looking pitiful. "Tim, do you find me disgusting?" Tears started streaming down her cheeks as she spoke. Tim, annoyed, rubbed his temples. "I don't find you disgusting," he said sternly. "It's just that things aren't the same anymore." Shirley seemed stunned by his words. Without another glance at her, Tim lay down, turning his back toward her. Unwilling to give up, Shirley crawled to the floor, embracing Tim's waist from behind. "Tim, I know you still care about me. You married Mandy out of spite. Now we can start over," she whispered, her hands roaming over Tim. Tim grabbed her hands fiercely. "Do that again, and you sleep in your room," he snapped. Shirley, hurt by his coldness, hesitated before retreating to the bed. My heart, which had been pounding in anger, finally calmed down a little. Tim, distressed by Shirley's advances, tossed and turned, unable to sleep. He took out his phone again, thinking for a moment, and opened our chat. The last message stayed at can you join us for Frank's birthday in 2 days? I used to send him several messages a day, to which he'd often reply with just one word, okay. It had been several days since I last messaged him, perhaps that puzzled him. After some thought, he typed a line, sorry, can we celebrate Frank's birthday when I return? His handsome brows furrowed, he deleted it, and instead typed, have you seen my black suit jacket? I laughed mockingly. Didn't he drape that very jacket over Shirley earlier? Was this just to spite me? He just kept erasing the words in the chat box, conflicted. Decisively, he turned off his phone and closed his eyes. I couldn't understand him. What was he thinking? The village where they taught was really remote, but the village chief greeted them with a wide smile. Tim, it's great you're here to teach the kids. Tim had fast-tracked from undergrad to his PhD. If not for Shirley, he wouldn't have come here to teach. The kids were excited to see a new teacher, and jumped around happily. Shirley took out snacks from her bag and passed them around. One lively kid boldly asked, Miss Shirley, are you and Mr. Tim boyfriend and girlfriend? Everyone went quiet at this, and Shirley also looked at Tim with a smile. It seemed like they were all waiting for him to give a positive answer. He didn't deny it. The kid then said, Miss Shirley is so pretty. You and Mr. Tim must be a couple. Shirley patted the kid's head and said, you're so young. Do you even know what boyfriend and girlfriend means? Of course I do. I felt a chill in my heart. If it weren't for me, Tim and Shirley would have been together long ago. I'm the one delaying them. For more than half a month, Tim and Shirley really acted like a couple, teaching during the day and having long talks at night. During this time, Frank called Tim several times, but he didn't pick up. Frank also sent him many texts, telling him to come back quickly because I was gone. The last text threatened to cut off their father-son relationship if he didn't return. Tim's good-looking brows furrowed, and he sarcastically said, Mandy, you want me back so badly that you'd get Frank to lie. Frank was reasonable. If he wasn't desperate, he wouldn't have said something like that. Tim must think I influenced Frank to say it. He immediately blocked my number. What's wrong? Shirley walked over and affectionately handed him a bottle of water. Nothing. Is it Mandy? Is she urging you to go back? She put on a pitiful look. I'm sorry, Tim. It's because of me that Mandy misunderstands and causes trouble between you two. Don't worry about it. It's not your fault, but you still came here with me to teach. She might be upset because of that. Though she said this, I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. Then she changed the subject. But don't worry. As a woman, I understand other women. Just ignore her for a few days and get her a small gift when you go back. Everything will be fine. Whenever I got a bit moody, Tim would buy me small gifts. I was always easy to please. But now, I'll never accept his gifts again. I remember being bullied as a child, hiding alone in fear. It was Tim who came over and handed me a piece of candy. He said, don't be afraid. I'll go with you to tell the teacher. I was weak and scared to speak up when bullied. He was like a light in my darkness, lighting up my world. From then on, I secretly liked him. Tim was an excellent student. To follow in his footsteps, I studied late into the night. Finally, I got into the same college as him. But by then, Shirley was already by his side. They were a perfect match. I retreated into my corner and silently wished them well. On graduation day, Shirley went abroad, and Tim got drunk. I mustered up the courage to confess to him. He smiled and said, okay. I couldn't believe it, and my eyes widened. From that day on, I boldly appeared before him, doing everything possible to please him. I asked him if he was only willing to be with me because Shirley left. He smiled and said, we're all going to marry and have kids eventually. Might as well pick someone who doesn't bother me. Doesn't bother him. My heart felt a sting, but I told myself I'd warm his heart eventually. Tim was kind and polite to everyone, even if he didn't love them. After we got married, he never lacked in providing for me materially. He always prepared flawless gifts for birthdays and holidays. As a husband, he was perfect. When we had kids, he took on his responsibility as a father. Everyone thought we were the happiest family of 3. Over the years, he was indeed good to me, enough to make me forget he didn't love me. I thought I had entered his world. Then Shirley returned. Everything changed after that. He became anxious and restless. That night, we had our first big fight. He said he wanted to take a leave and teach in the countryside. I said, you're not a new teacher. Why do you need to teach? His eyes shifted, and he sounded irritated. Don't worry about it. Is it because Shirley is back? I'd already suspected something due to his odd behavior, and had seen a message about Shirley taking a position at their school. I pretended to be calm, yet he wanted to join her in the countryside. Tim, who grew up in a prestigious family, had never suffered like this. He was willing to do it for Shirley. Or maybe he just wanted to be alone with Shirley. Mandy, don't overthink it. I'm just accompanying her. She's a girl, it's not safe for her to go alone. He rubbed his brows, looking like I was being unreasonable. Not safe? Have you worried about me these years? I bit my lip, tears welling up. Tim said nothing, and I cried as I ran back to our room. He didn't follow me. That night, I stayed up all night. I took out a medical report from the drawer. The doctor had stopped me alone to tell me something shocking. I had breast cancer. Afraid Tim would worry, I begged the doctor not to tell him and secretly started chemotherapy alone. Now that Shirley's back, will he divorce me? I lived in a daze for a few days. On Frank's birthday, the doctor told me I didn't have much time left. I hoped Tim would stay with us. Frank called him as he was rushing to the airport. You say I'm dying, he mimicked sarcastically. What's your mom trying to pull this time? It was clear he was in a hurry. So much so that before Frank could retort, he hung up. When Frank called back, the message said, the number you dialed is currently switched off. He really didn't want to be bothered. Or maybe he couldn't wait to be alone with his first love. Tim, you're so heartless. That's your Frank. Even if you don't believe me, you should believe him. Perhaps because he's my son, he doesn't matter as much to you. I think if it were Shirley, you wouldn't act this way. The housekeeper Susan called Tim, saying she hadn't seen Frank and me for over half a month. Tim coldly replied over the phone, don't worry, they'll come back once they've had enough. Before, when I had small arguments with Tim, I would take Frank and stay at my mom's for a few days. My mom would always try to reconcile us, and when my anger subsided, I would take Frank back. He must think I'm playing the silent treatment, that after a few days, I would return with my tail between my legs, all embarrassed, and warm up to him again. But this time is different. I've been gone for more than half a month. Tim, don't you have a heart? Didn't you realize, when normally obedient Frank said something so final? That woman, Mandy, is dead. No one is there to text you all the time, and care about every little thing you do. Tears welled up in my eyes. I wanted so much to tell Tim, beg him to go back, see Frank. He must be in so much pain. I just want to say, Mandy always cared about you. Susan sighed. Over the years, I've seen that Mandy put you first in everything. Even though I don't know what happened between you two, I can see she truly loved you. There's no overnight grudge between a husband and wife. Talking it out solves everything. I really hope you cherish this marriage. Susan didn't know I was dead. It seems Frank must have gone to my mom's. Thinking of my mom burying her child with grey hair, my heart ached. Tim impatiently hung up the phone, seeming to be in a bad mood. When Shirley came looking for him, he was sitting on a stone bench, smoking. Smoking is bad for your health. She walked over and naturally took the cigarette from his fingers. Tim, why do you look so worried? Are you still mad because of Mandy's tantrums? She raised Tim's chin with her hand, forcing him to meet her gaze. Her slender, pale fingers gently caressed his cheek. Her gaze was longing and lingering. Don't be angry over a woman like that, okay? A woman like that. Hearing this, Tim frowned and turned his face away. It seemed he didn't like Shirley calling me that. Shirley didn't back down despite Tim's avoidance. Instead, she moved closer. Her voice was soft with a hint of seduction. Tim, don't you see? Only I truly understand you. Suddenly, a wave of inexplicable annoyance surged in Tim's heart. He abruptly stood up, shaking off Shirley's hand. You understand me. If you did, you wouldn't have left me to go study in Germany. Shirley was startled by his reaction, but soon she calmed down and said softly, I know I was wrong back then, but... Tim sneered, that's enough. Mandy is my wife. I hope you respect her. With that, he turned and left, leaving Shirley standing there, stunned. Her eyes flashed with resentment and unwillingness, but she quickly masked it. This was the first time Tim had spoken harshly to Shirley. Maybe he was still nursing a grudge over her abandoning him for Germany back then. Tim grew more restless, not knowing why he felt this way. He took out his phone and after searching for a while, realized he had blacklisted me. He opened Instagram and saw the same message about Frank's birthday. This time, he didn't hesitate and typed quickly, sorry, I'll make it up to Frank when I get back. After sending it, he felt a wave of relief and put his phone away. Every break in class, he took it out to check. Even in class, if his phone vibrated, he stopped teaching to check it immediately. It was a spam message. Disappointed, he closed it again. I couldn't help but chuckle from above. Was he having a change of heart? Was he urgently waiting for my reply? All night, his phone didn't ring. Tim thought perhaps the mountain's signal was bad, so he wandered outside, refreshing the chat box as he walked. How childish and ridiculous. The next day, Shirley woke up early, wearing Tim's black jacket. Tim, your jacket looks great on me. She posed in front of the mirror, enjoying herself. Tim lay on the bed, watching her silhouette, emotions flashing in his eyes. He rubbed his temples, sat up, and got dressed. Shirley, let's talk. He walked up to Shirley, looking at her. Shirley didn't expect him to say this and was momentarily stunned, then she nodded. They sat on the couch. Tim looked at her and spoke seriously. Shirley, we can't go back to the past. Shirley's eyes reddened. She bit her lip, looking at him aggrievedly. Tim, I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have been so headstrong back then and left you. She spoke, tears rolling down her cheeks. Tim looked at her, feeling a touch of helplessness. With a sigh, Tim said, Shirley, we're not kids anymore. We should be responsible for our actions. Shirley was taken aback. Tim stood up, walked to the window, and stared at the scenery outside. Shirley, I hope you find your own happiness. With that, he turned and left. Shirley watched him leave, her eyes full of reluctance, but quickly, she caved to Tim. She admitted she shouldn't have called me that yesterday. Tim's attitude reverted back, saying the person who should apologize is me. Yesterday, it was my bad attitude, and I apologize to you. In my impression, Tim was always a gentleman with great manners. No matter how angry he got, he was always outwardly courteous and polite. Yesterday was so out of character. For a 3-month volunteer teaching stint, Tim claimed he had something urgent, and cut it short to 1.5 months. Did he sense something was wrong? Time flew by, and he returned home with Shirley. As soon as they entered the house, Susan anxiously said, You're finally back. The school called. They said Frank has been skipping classes for more than a month. I couldn't reach your wife's phone either, and I didn't dare to bother you at work. Susan always got along well with me, but as an employee, she was scared that saying too much might upset Tim and get her fired. Tim's face turned grim. He quickly pulled out his phone and took my number off the blacklist. He dialed it, but it showed his account had overdue charges. He hurriedly topped up $1,000 for me. He dialed again, and the response was still sorry. The number you are trying to reach is currently switched off. He then opened the message box and quickly typed, Have you and Frank had enough of this? Come back now. Even now, he thought I was just throwing a tantrum and had taken Frank away to get back at him. Tim, I wonder what your expression would be when you see my ashes. I'm kind of excited to know how you'd react to my death. Would you be sad? I mean, we were together for 7 years. Even if I were a dog, there should be some feelings, right? Tim, would you regret it? Regret not seeing me one last time? Tim sent me lots of texts, but I didn't respond. Seeing him so restless, Shirley tried to comfort him, saying, Don't worry, Mandy's grown up. She probably just took Frank on a trip to relax. Tim's tightly furrowed brows eased a bit at her words. Every year, I'd take Frank on trips, but only during summer vacations. Tim, if you had paid more attention to me and Frank, you would know Shirley was just humoring you. Maybe he did know, but didn't want to think about it. He packed his books and headed off to his lectures as usual. These past few days, Tim taught classes during the day, joking and chatting with people. But at night, he was like a cat on a hot tin roof. He kept taking out his phone and scrolling through our old chat records over and over. Finally, he couldn't handle it anymore and started calling and messaging me like crazy. But the automated response was the same cold message. In the message box were still the texts he had sent. Seeing no reply from me, he got desperate. Mandy, if you don't come back, we're getting a divorce. He finally said it. Isn't that what is always wanted? I chuckled bitterly. I wanted to give you what you wanted, but you didn't give me the time. After sending that message, Tim seemed to find it inappropriate. He quickly typed, I'm sorry. I realize I was wrong. I shouldn't have gone to volunteer teaching with Shirley. Mandy, where are you? Please don't be mad. Come back with Frank. This was the first time Tim had ever yielded to me. Watching his anxious and helpless expression gave me an odd satisfaction. The next day, Tim didn't go to work. He went straight to my mom's house. When he saw Frank again, he had lost so much weight. His young face had an aged, mature look. My heart ached deeply. He must have thought the world had collapsed. His loving mom was gone, and his dad didn't care about him. My mom's eyes were red and swollen. She seemed to have trouble seeing clearly, probably from crying too much recently. Her eyes were damaged from all the tears. When they saw Tim, they were as cold as strangers. What are you doing here? Where's Mandy? Where did she go? Frank, why have you been skipping school? Did your mom tell you not to go? Even now, he thought it was me instigating Frank not to go to school. How laughable. Could this man not see Frank and my mom's attitudes? Could he not feel that I was already gone? I desperately hoped Frank and my mom wouldn't tell him about my death, letting him think I was still alive. Tim, live in your guilt and regret. Tim, how do you still have the nerve to come here? My mom said coldly. Mom, where's Mandy? Where did she go? Tim, Mandy has passed away. Why are you still looking for her? My mom said furiously. Mom, what kind of joke is this? Tim wouldn't believe it. You're lying. There's no way Mandy could be dead. She just asked me to help plan Frank's birthday. My mom's voice, choked with sobs, was icy as she said, Mandy died of breast cancer. She passed away on Frank's birthday. She hid her cancer from you all along, afraid you would worry, and she wouldn't let me tell you. But you were off with your lover, having a good time, not even bothering to call her once. Mandy was still thinking of you until her last breath. She died with regrets. She couldn't have died. I haven't even fulfilled my promises to her yet. Tim crumbled to the floor, his expression vacant, mumbling to himself. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. No way. I don't believe it. He kept repeating over and over. Tim sat there, dazed, his eyes hollow, lifeless. Frank threw a diagnosis report at his face. Here's Mom's diagnosis report. See for yourself. Tim picked it up from the floor and flipped through the pages. His hands were trembling so much he could barely hold it. He cried to Frank, breast cancer can be treated. Where's your mom? We'll take her to the best doctors for treatment. Tell me, where is she? Frank pointed to a small box on the dining table. There. The air froze. Tim's pupils dilated. No, you're lying. You're all lying to me. Frank shook his head violently, his eyes wet, crying and shouting. You're doing this on purpose, right? Teaming up with Mandy to trick me, aren't you? This isn't funny at all. Quickly tell me where your mom is. He screamed at Frank, almost hysterically. Frank pulled out a cremation certificate and threw it at him. See for yourself. Tim flipped through the agreement, only to see deceased person to be cremated, Mandy. Frank angrily shoved him. Maybe Tim hadn't been sleeping well the past few days, as he stumbled back and hit the door frame. His eyes were empty, his face pale, as if his soul had been snatched away. He was panicking. He finally knew that I was dead. He finally realized the urgency, but what difference did it make? I would never return. He trembled as he walked step by step to my ashes. He carefully held the urn and then knelt down. I'm sorry. My mom snatched the urn from him. What right do you have to repent here? Get out. Mom, please, give Mandy back to me, please. He cried so hard his nose ran, clinging to my mom's leg. Tim, you trampled on Mandy's feelings. You neglected your wife Frank to go volunteer with your lover. Do you deserve to be a husband and father? My mom became more agitated, swung her hand and slapped him. Tim didn't dodge, and a clear imprint of 5 fingers appeared on his cheek, with a bit of blood at the corner of his mouth. Seems like my mom was really angry. Frank rushed over, questioning him. I called you so many times, sent so many texts. Why didn't you reply? Do you know, Mom was still calling your name with her last breath. If it wasn't for you, Mom wouldn't have died with resentment. From today, you are no longer my dad. Get out. Frank's crying was so intense, it hurt me deeply. He was the one person I couldn't let go of in this world. He was so obedient and understanding. How would he manage without a mother's care? And my mom, my dad died early. She only had me as a daughter. Now that I'm gone, how will she live out the rest of her years? Watching my mom and Frank cry together, it felt like my heart was being ripped apart. Tim tried reaching for my urn again, but my mom stopped him. Get out. Never show up in front of me again. My mom glared at him with disgust, then hugged the urn and walked away. Frank also glared at him with reddened eyes before following after her. Tim knelt there alone, as limp as a piece of wood. He hung his head, his shoulders trembling, suppressing his sobs. He wanted my ashes, but my mom said he'd have to step over her dead body. When Tim left, my mom tossed him a divorce agreement. I had carefully prepared this while I was still alive. Shirley's return was like a premonition, indicating that my marriage with Tim was doomed. And I, suffering from cancer, thought letting go might be the best option for everyone. On Frank's birthday, I had hoped Tim would come and spend that special day with us and hand over that divorce agreement. However, he never showed up. Tim, have you ever felt any regret? If you had come sooner, perhaps you could have taken the agreement with peace of mind and spent the rest of your life with your first love. Frank questioned him. Mom was always thinking of you even in her final moments. But what about you? For the sake of your lover, you missed seeing Mom one last time. Mom's heart and eyes were filled with you all these years. If you didn't love Mom, why did you marry her in the first place? Tim remained silent. Maybe he really didn't know how to answer. He went home, locked himself in his room and stared at the wedding photo on the bedside table. The woman in the photo was smiling brightly, as if the whole world was in her smile. He reached out, gently stroking her face in the photo, tears silently falling. He kept repeating, I'm sorry, but I could no longer hear his remorse, nor see his tears. I left this world with a heart full of regret and frustration. How ironic. When people are alive they don't cherish, and only after death do they put on this show of deep affection. Tim's messages kept flooding into my chat box. Where have you gone? They say you are dead. I don't believe it. You must be hiding from me somewhere, right? Please come back, okay? I miss you so much. Each message made me so nauseous, I almost wanted to throw up. Tim had never been this tender and loving, but I'm already dead. Who are your actions for now? Tim seemed to have spiraled into some kind of madness. He would stand at the podium, often telling the students that his wife would come pick him up soon, so he couldn't go over time. The students found it creepy. Wasn't Tim's wife already dead? What happened to Tim? Even the dean personally persuaded him to go home and rest, but he refused. He said he needed to make money to support his wife and kids. Everyone said he was crazy. Eventually, Tim was forced to stop teaching. One day, Shirley came to visit him. She tried to comfort him by saying, "The dead can't come back to life. You need to move on." But seeing Shirley was like seeing an enemy for Tim. He suddenly grabbed a fruit knife from the table and fiercely stabbed at her. He cursed harshly. "If it weren't for you seducing me, I wouldn't have gone to volunteer out in the countryside, and Mandy wouldn't have died. It's you. You killed my Mandy. You die." I was so shocked by his sudden action that I immediately sought a place to hide. Then I remembered. I was already dead. They couldn't see me. Shirley clutched her stomach in pain, her eyes filled with disbelief. "Tim, are you crazy?" "Yes, I'm crazy." Blood stained Shirley's white dress red. The maid Susan saw this and hurriedly called the police and an ambulance. When Shirley was being lifted into the ambulance, her eyes were full of resentment and unwillingness. Tim was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia and delusional disorder, and was admitted to a mental hospital. He often sat on the ground alone for an entire day. Sometimes he would be active, telling everyone about his beloved wife. When people ignored him, he would beg them to listen. At night, he would quietly take out his phone to text me. "Tomorrow is Frank's birthday. Let's have dinner together as a family, okay? Frank keeps ignoring me. Can you please talk to him for me? I miss your braised fish. Why aren't you responding to me anymore?" It seemed he had really lost his mind. After Tim was admitted, my mom moved with Frank to a new place. She didn't want to see Tim again, nor did she want Frank to be influenced by him anymore. She protected the only bloodline I left behind in her own way. And Tim, he lost all of us and also lost his soul. He can never go back to the past, never find the happiness we once had. All of this, he brought upon himself. He accompanied his first love to the countryside to volunteer as a teacher, but in the end, he destroyed his family and his life. I think if time could rewind, he would choose to stay with me and Frank, to protect our happiness. But, unfortunately, time doesn't rewind, and everything is beyond repair. I can only watch him silently from heaven. People, they only know to regret after they've lost something. Tim's epilogue. Since I was a child, I was influenced by my family to treat people with respect. I always admired Shirley, but she chose to break up with me to study abroad. I was sad and in pain, but I wished her a bright future. Mandy suddenly confessed her love to me, and I didn't dislike her. If one had to get married and have children in this lifetime, why not choose someone suitable as a wife? After marrying Mandy, I tried hard to be a good husband, and after having a child, I worked hard to be a good father. I thought my life would go by just like that, but Shirley suddenly returned from abroad, interrupting my thoughts. Seeing her again, the feelings buried deep in my heart surfaced completely. She was going to the countryside as an intern teacher, and for some reason, I agreed to go with her. Mandy recently became unpredictable, even checking my phone secretly. Because of this volunteer teaching thing, she had a huge fight with me for the first time. She even had Frank lie to me, saying she was dying. Ridiculous. Since when did this woman become so jealous? Accompanying Shirley to the countryside was just to say a final goodbye to my past self. When Shirley showed affection towards me, I thought of Mandy and decisively rejected her. Frank called and texted me many times. I guess that woman Mandy put him up to it. Does she really not trust me that much? The babysitter called and said she hadn't seen them for over half a month, and I was puzzled. This woman has such a temper. It's been so many days, and she still hasn't come home. I went to work during the day, worried at night, and after hesitating for a long time, I messaged her. No reply. Forget it. I continued working. When I got home, the nanny said the school called to say Frank had been missing classes for days, and I panicked. I was really scared. I rushed to my mother-in-law's house and found Frank, finally feeling relieved. but they told me Mandy had died. I couldn't believe it. Frank showed me the diagnosis report and the cremation agreement. I was stunned. I couldn't believe that woman Mandy was already dead. I never thought she would completely leave my side. I felt like falling into an abyss, filled with fear and terror. I was in so much pain. I could barely breathe. I hated myself for not even being there for her last moment. I didn't understand her at all, missing the news of her death time and again. I wished I could stab myself with a knife. I had a mental breakdown, and when Shirley came to see me, somehow I stabbed her. I thought everything was her fault. If it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have missed Frank's birthday, and I wouldn't have missed Mandy's last moments. I was put in a mental hospital. I heard Shirley was saved, but she suffered nerve damage, leading to paralysis on one side. As for me, I often chat with fellow patients. Mostly I talk, they listen. I tell them I have a wife who loves me very much. She's still waiting for me at home.